Wink has real grapefruit, oranges, limes.
A unique blend of whole grain wheat and whole grain rye.
So anytime at all is the time for milk.
We didn't count calories, we didn't fear fat, and yet somehow we were effortlessly skinny in the 1960s without even trying. What quiet secret did we lose when we traded home-cooked meals and rationed habits for snacks, shortcuts, and supersized living? Back in the 1960s, dinner time was sacred. Families gathered around the table, not with takeout containers or microwave trays, but with steaming dishes made from scratch. It was not about gourmet meals, it was about care, routine, and rhythm. A pot roast that simmered all afternoon, biscuits that rose while homework got done, and green beans snapped by hand. Mothers, or sometimes fathers, knew how to stretch a roast across 3 meals. Leftovers were not an afterthought, they were strategy. You knew what was in your food because someone in your house had peeled it, stirred it, seasoned it. There were no hidden preservatives or mystery sauces, no additives you could not pronounce, just butter, salt, and thyme. This kind of cooking did not just feed people, it shaped their sense of enough. Meals came with rules, boundaries, and pauses. You felt full because dinner was a moment, not a motion. And the kitchen was not just a room, it was a heartbeat. But what happens when the portions themselves begin to change, quietly, gradually, until we no longer recognize what a normal plate looks like? You did not leave a 1960s dinner table feeling stuffed. You felt satisfied, just enough. Back then, what we now call a kid's meal would have easily fed an entire family. A single scoop of mashed potatoes, a half chicken breast, and a cup of green beans. That was dinner, not a side. Fast food had not yet crept into every corner of life, and restaurants served what they could carry on one plate, not what needed a tray. Portions were modest because the mindset was modest. You ate what you needed, not what you craved. Even desserts were slivers, not slabs. You might get a slice of pie the width of 2 fingers, and nobody questioned it. That was just how it was. Supersizing had not been invented yet, because no one was asking for more. Our grandparents looked at food as fuel, not entertainment. And somehow that left room for everything else: walking, talking, living. But if the portions were small, the expectations were big, and you were not getting seconds if you did not finish the first helping, because in that house, you ate what was served. Children in the 1960s knew better than to complain about dinner. You did not like it? Tough. You sat, you chewed, you swallowed. The idea of making a second meal to suit someone's taste was laughable. It was not cruel, it was culture. Food waste was frowned upon. Picky eating was gently, or not so gently, corrected. If you were lucky, there might be a slice of bread and butter after. But snacking? That was not a word in common use. Maybe an apple after school, maybe a graham cracker. But you did not graze through cabinets at midnight or crunch chips in front of the television. The kitchen closed when dinner ended. And the idea that a child could demand chicken nuggets or peanut butter sandwiches because they did not want the casserole? That would have sounded like a joke. Eating was not an all-day activity. It had a start, a stop, and a purpose. It gave you energy to live your life. And back then, that life was not spent on a couch or in a car. It was spent outside, on your feet, chasing time. In the 1960s, you got where you needed to go with your own 2 legs. No one was chauffeuring kids across town for fun. You walked to school, to the corner store, to your best friend's house. Sidewalks were used and front porches were where parents kept a quiet eye. There were bikes, yes, but mostly there were feet. Movement was built into the fabric of life. You did not think of it as exercise. You just moved. If it rained, you wore boots. If it snowed, you trudged through it. This kind of daily, low-grade motion did more than just burn calories. It grounded people in their communities, their neighborhoods, their routines. No one tracked their steps. No one needed to, because standing still was rare and sitting was brief. And when the school bell rang or the groceries were brought home, the day still had light in it. And that meant it was time to go outside, not to a screen or a sofa, but to the yard, the field, or the curb where the real stories lived. Fridays were not for feasting. They were for making do. For many American households, especially Catholic ones, meat was off the table by tradition. But even beyond faith, the culture leaned into simplicity. A can of green beans, maybe a dish of creamed corn, macaroni with a few slices of canned tomato on top. These were not signs of poverty. They were just dinner. Canned vegetables were everywhere, and so was the logic behind them. They lasted. They were cheap. They were practical. Add a few breadcrumbs, and suddenly you had a casserole. Add a dash of mustard, and it became a sauce. With war rationing not so far in the past, and frugality still stitched into the generation's DNA, skipping meat was not a sacrifice. It was a routine. It kept people thinner, but it also kept them humble. Meals were built around what you had, not what you wanted. And with that mindset, you did not feel deprived. You felt resourceful. But the real magic came after dinner, when the plates were cleared and the screen door slammed behind you, and the whole neighborhood turned into your playground. In the 1960s, kids did not need a gym or a treadmill. They had the whole world outside their front door. You ran until your knees were scraped, your shirt was soaked, and the streetlights blinked on like a bedtime bell. There were no structured play dates, no scheduled screen-free hours. Play was not supervised, it was expected. You chased friends, climbed trees, jumped rope, and dragged your muddy shoes home without a single thought about calories. Sitting still was a punishment, not a pastime. Indoors was where you went when you were sick or grounded. The sun dictated your schedule, and you never looked at the clock. Parents did not hover. They hollered from porches when it was time for dinner, and all that movement, the constant, joyful chaos, kept bodies lean without ever talking about weight. Childhood was not just more active, it was free. But when you did come inside, panting and sunburned, there was no energy drink waiting, no neon-colored juice box. If you were lucky, maybe, just maybe, there was a cold soda in the fridge. Opening the fridge and finding a bottle of soda in the 1960s was like striking gold. It was not part of lunch, it was not paired with dinner, it was a treat, and everyone in the house knew it. The glass bottle was shared, savored, and never wasted. No one sat with a 2-liter bottle beside the couch or refilled a cup 5 times. Soda was reserved for birthdays, cookouts, or Sundays when guests came over. Even the advertising was different. It sold the feeling of a moment, not the habit of addiction. Most kids drank milk, water, or if they were lucky, a powdered fruit drink. Sugar was not banned, but it was earned. And you never expected a second bottle. The rarity made it magical. It tingled on your tongue and made your eyes water, and you remembered every single time you got one. That small bottle of soda stayed special because it never tried to replace what came first, breakfast. But even there, sugar was the exception, not the rule. In the weekday mornings of the 1960s, the kitchen did not smell like chocolate or marshmallows. It smelled like oats, toast, maybe eggs, maybe cream of wheat. Sugary cereal existed, sure, but it was saved for Saturdays or sleepovers. Most mornings were quieter and simpler. A pot of oatmeal bubbled on the stove, maybe a drizzle of honey, maybe a chopped apple. There was no rainbow-colored milk left behind, no cartoon mascots dancing on boxes promising prizes. Breakfast was something warm and slow, not poured and rushed. It stuck to your ribs. It got you through the school day. And if you complained, you went hungry. There were no alternatives. The sugar came later, if at all. And that simplicity, that restraint, was not punishment. It was rhythm. It was knowing that not every craving needed to be met. It was nourishment without indulgence. And when lunch rolled around, it followed the same rule. Feed the body, not the appetite. There were no taco bars or pizza Fridays in 1960s school cafeterias. You stood in a quiet line, tray in hand, and took what was offered. A sandwich on plain bread, a cup of soup, a spoonful of peas, maybe a square of gelatin. Lunch was functional, made to hold you over until dinner, not entertain your taste buds. Kids did not throw away whole trays of food. You ate or you went hungry. Even packed lunches followed the same code: peanut butter on white bread, an apple, and a thermos of milk. No chips, no fruit snacks, no pudding packs. And that simplicity made room for something bigger: recess. You were not weighed down with grease or sugar. You had just enough to keep you moving. And when you got home, the smells from the kitchen wrapped around you like a coat. Because Mom was cooking. Not reheating, not unboxing. Cooking. And that kind of dinner meant time, effort, and calories burned long before the first bite. In a 1960s kitchen, you could hear the rhythm of real food being made. A pot clattered on the stove. Something sizzled in a pan. The oven ticked softly as it preheated. There was no microwave hum, no frozen dinners spinning on a plastic tray. Meals took time, sometimes hours. And that time meant movement. Stirring, lifting, chopping, baking. Parents did not just burn calories eating, they burned them making dinner. Even heating up leftovers meant a skillet, not a button. There was an awareness of food, a presence that modern life has blurred. You did not grab something, you prepared it. Every meal was a small ritual of care and effort. And the work was not just about taste, it was part of staying lean. The process itself kept you moving. And when dinner was finally done, the table was set. The family sat down, and you ate like you meant it. But before dinner, there was one sound every kid waited for: the squeak of tires, the slap of pedals, the call of the open street. Because nothing felt freer or fitter than flying down a hill on your bicycle. In the 1960s, a bicycle was more than just a toy. It was a rite of passage. Your first real taste of freedom came with 2 wheels and a rusty chain, not a smartphone. You pedaled to the corner store, to the library, to the edge of your neighborhood and beyond. It was transportation, recreation, and cardio all wrapped in one squeaky frame. Helmets were rare, scraped knees were common, and nobody tracked distance, because you rode until the streetlights told you to stop. Every hill was a challenge, every slope a reward. There were no fancy gears, no lightweight carbon frames, just steel, sweat, and legs that got stronger every week. And the best part? No one called it exercise. It was fun. Unstructured, unrestricted, full-body fun. You did not burn calories on purpose. You just did not know how to sit still. And when you did finally coast into the driveway, wind in your hair and dirt on your jeans, there was no instant dinner waiting in a box. Dinner still had to be made. And if you were lucky, maybe it was one of those rare nights for a TV dinner, with its own tiny dessert and tinfoil top. Television dinners in the 1960s were not everyday fare. They were events. That foil-wrapped tray pulled from the oven after what felt like hours was a small luxury. Salisbury steak, mashed potatoes, a spoonful of peas, and maybe a brownie in the corner. It was not convenience. It was novelty. Something you might get if Mom was sick, or Dad was working late, or you were being treated to a night in front of the television. These frozen meals had no illusions about nutrition. They were a break from the norm, not the new normal. Most nights, food was cooked from scratch. These dinners were backup plans, not blueprints. They felt modern, space-age even, but no one mistook them for real food. They were too small, too salty, too stiff. They were a glimpse of the future, but nobody wanted to live in them. And when it came time to celebrate, no one turned to the freezer. They got in the car and went somewhere special. Because eating out, that was something you dressed up for. Going to a restaurant in the 1960s was a big deal. You put on nice clothes, you combed your hair, you behaved. Families did not dine out every weekend or grab drive-through on the way home from errands. You waited for a birthday, an anniversary, or a holiday. Eating out meant menus printed on cardstock, waitresses in uniforms, and glasses of ice water placed before you said a word. Kids ordered from the adult menu, and everyone shared a dessert. There were no kids' zones, no touch screens, no buckets of soda. Just real food, real conversation, and the unspoken understanding that this was special. It cost money, it took time, and it mattered. Most nights, families cooked and ate at home because it was cheaper, yes, but also because it was the default. Dining out had not replaced dinner. It was the exception to prove the rule. And when you did go home to cook, what you bought from the store looked very different from what fills shelves today. Grocery stores in the 1960s were simpler, smaller, and less cluttered with choices. You walked in with a handwritten list and walked out with ingredients, not ready-made meals. The aisles were short, the freezers were small. You bought flour, not frosting, whole chicken, not chicken nuggets. There were no aisles lined with color-coded diet bars or 100 kinds of chips. The processed food boom had not fully hit yet. What was on the shelves was basic: canned vegetables, dry pasta, rice, soup. You still had to cook it, transform it, make it stretch. Food was not engineered to keep you snacking. It was designed to fill you up. The closer you stayed to the edges of the store, the butcher, the produce stand, the bakery, the more likely you were to leave with something real. And if you wanted the freshest ingredients, you did not always buy them. You grew them. The backyard garden was not just a hobby in the 1960s. It was a strategy. Rows of tomatoes, carrots, beans, and squash filled raised beds or long-tilled strips of soil. You grew what you could, canned what you had to, and traded with neighbors when your zucchinis got out of hand. Children learned how to weed and water before they could spell vegetable. Victory gardens from the war had planted a deeper cultural seed. Food could come from your own hands. A salad did not start in a bag. It started with dirt under your fingernails. Fresh produce was not wrapped in plastic or stamped with barcodes. It came in baskets, buckets, or brown paper sacks. And even if you only had room for a few herbs on the windowsill, it still mattered. Gardens were not just about nutrition. They were about self-reliance. And that pride, that satisfaction of eating what you grew, made it easier to say no to processed junk. Instead of neon-colored sports drinks and vitamin water, most kids drank the same thing every day: milk, plain and cold, straight from the fridge. In the 1960s, kids did not crack open energy drinks before baseball practice or sip neon-colored concoctions at recess. They drank milk, plain, white, sometimes whole, sometimes skim, but always cold from the fridge. It was poured into short glasses, served with toast, cereal, and sometimes even dinner. Chocolate milk was a treat, and strawberry milk felt like dessert. Milk was not marketed for muscles or loaded with caffeine. It was just part of growing up. It filled lunchboxes and small metal thermoses and coated breakfast dishes in quiet routine. And if you did not like milk, you learned to drink it anyway. There were no fizzy boosts, no sugar bombs disguised as hydration. Just milk, water, and the occasional orange juice if someone had been to the store recently. And somehow, kids ran harder, played longer, and stayed leaner on it. Maybe it was not just what we drank, but how much we drank. Because even what we poured into a glass had limits, and those limits started with something you probably never noticed: the size of the plates on the table. A standard dinner plate in the 1960s looked almost child-sized by today's standards. Cups held 8 ounces, not 32. Bowls were shallow, not deep enough to drown a full bag of cereal. Portion control was not a buzzword. It was built into the dinnerware. Food did not overflow, and meals were not measured by how much could be stacked. You got one helping, and it fit neatly on a plate that encouraged modesty. This was not about dieting. It was just how things were. You were not supposed to feel stuffed. You were supposed to feel fed. Seconds were rare, thirds unheard of. Sodas came in glass bottles the size of your hand, and no one filled their plate like they were building a buffet tower. Serving spoons were smaller, ladles lighter. It all reinforced one idea: enough was enough. And when the main course hit the table, even the star of the show, meat, was more often a guest star than the main attraction. A meal without meat in the 1960s did not feel like a sacrifice. It felt normal. Meat was precious and often expensive, so it played a smaller role on the plate. You might get one pork chop, a few slices of roast beef, or a spoonful of ground beef mixed into a casserole. But vegetables, grains, and starches made up the bulk. Potatoes, carrots, rice, beans, these were the foundation. Nobody was grilling 16-ounce steaks on a Tuesday. or loading a plate with double meat patties. It was not just about cost, it was about custom. A sandwich had a slice or two of ham. A dinner had a few bites of meat, balanced by heaps of sides. Meat added flavor, not bulk. It was a boost, not the base. And because it was not center stage, it kept waistlines in check without anyone ever calling it lean protein. Even dessert followed this same pattern, rare, modest, and always, always earned. In the 1960s, dessert was a ritual, not a routine. It was not something you just pulled from the freezer or popped in the microwave because you felt like it. Dessert came after dinner, and only if you had cleaned your plate. You did not argue, you did not negotiate. You either ate your peas or you kissed that scoop of vanilla goodbye. Desserts were small, a cookie, a slice of cake, a dish of canned fruit with a dollop of whipped topping. But they tasted like a reward. And because they were not a given, they stayed special. You never expected dessert with lunch. You never reached for ice cream while watching television. Sugar was something that closed a meal, not filled in for one. This restraint did more than keep people slim. It shaped discipline, built patience, and gave families something to savor together, if the timing was right. Because the true centerpiece of the week was not dessert. It was Sunday dinner, and what came after it was where thrift and tradition met on the plate. Sunday roasts were not just a meal, they were an institution. The roast, whether beef, chicken, or ham, was the anchor, but the goal was always the same: stretch it as far as it could go. Sunday's glory became Monday's sandwiches, Tuesday's stew, and sometimes even Wednesday's soup. Nothing went to waste. Bones were boiled for broth. Leftover carrots and potatoes were mashed, fried, or folded into casseroles. Meat was rationed with care, every slice calculated. And that careful planning created natural limits on consumption. It was not about dieting. It was about duty. Making a single roast last for days was not only frugal, it was smart. And as each day passed, the meal got simpler, lighter, leaner. By Thursday, dinner might be broth and bread. And yet, nobody complained. Because the ritual itself, the way food flowed from feast to frugality, was comforting. It told a story, and the best chapters were written not in the meals themselves, but around the table where they were shared. In the 1960s, the family dinner table was more than just a place to eat. It was where the day unfolded. You did not shovel food in front of a screen or wander the house with a plate in hand. You sat down. You passed dishes. You talked. Dinner was not rushed, and no one stared at a glowing rectangle. There was no binge-watching, no texting between bites. Conversation filled the gaps between chewing. You learned to listen, to pause, to wait your turn. And by the time the meal ended, your stomach had time to register what you had eaten. There was no need for calorie counting, just time and presence. You were full because you paid attention, because the table grounded you. And when bread was passed around, it was not a pillow of sugar and preservatives. It was thick, chewy, heavy with intention. The bread on 1960s tables was nothing like today's soft, sweet, air-puffed loaves. It had weight. It had crust. It took effort to slice and effort to chew. A single slice could fill you because it was made to nourish, not dissolve on your tongue. Store-bought bread was available, but even that had fewer additives and less sugar. And in many homes, bread still came from the oven, dense with whole grains, speckled with seeds, sometimes baked in coffee cans or iron skillets. There was no enriched flour, no high-fructose corn syrup. Bread was not a guilty pleasure. It was a staple, eaten in moderation because it was satisfying. You only needed one slice to feel full. And there was no pressure to avoid it, no trendy movement preaching against carbs. Because while people cared about their figures, they did not let food run their lives. Thin was noticed, but obsession was rare. People wanted to be healthy, but they were not counting almonds. The 1960s held up slimness as the standard, but not through punishment or obsession. There were no detox teas, no 24-hour gyms open at 3 in the morning. Nobody was tracking their macros or preaching about cheat days. People admired lean figures, yes, but the path there was not paved with guilt or shame. It was built into the rhythm of life. You moved more, you ate less, you did not sit with a spreadsheet of every calorie, because calories were not hiding in everything. You did not scroll past before and after photos all day, and children were not bombarded with ads about six-pack abs or bikini seasons. Being slim came from habits, not hacks, from real food, real movement, and not giving food the power to define your worth. That freedom shaped a different kind of confidence, and it started early, on the playground, on the field, and in one particular place that guaranteed kids stayed in motion, the schoolyard. In the 1960s, school recess and physical education were non-negotiable. You went outside, you moved, rain or shine. Kids ran laps, climbed jungle gyms, played dodgeball, and raced each other until their lungs burned and their faces flushed. Physical education was not a special elective. It was a core part of the curriculum. No one needed fancy equipment or curated routines. The point was to sweat, to move, to be loud and messy and active. And it worked. You burned off your lunch, your fidgets, your frustrations. There was no talk of sedentary lifestyles because you never sat still long enough. Even the classroom breaks were movement-driven. If the teacher said, "Time to stretch," you got up and did it. And when the school day ended, the movement did not stop. You walked home. You played outside. You watched a bit of television, but even that had its limits. Because with only 3 channels and no remote, watching TV still meant moving your body. Television in the 1960s was a very different affair. You had 3 channels, maybe 4 if the weather was kind, and if you wanted to change the channel, you had to get up and do it yourself. There was no remote, no binging, and no infinite scroll. Programs aired once, at a specific time, and if you missed it, you missed it. Commercial breaks were the time to get a snack, use the restroom, or settle arguments, not moments to grab your phone. Screens did not dominate your day, they punctuated it. Most homes had one television, and families gathered around it together. There was no background noise from a second screen in every room. Watching was an occasion, not a lifestyle, and because you were not glued to it for hours, you had more time to move, play, and yes, digest. Even your diet reflected this balance, because despite what we think today, the 1960s were already cutting carbs without even realizing it. In the 1960s, nobody called it low carb, but meals were naturally lighter on bread and starch than what fills plates today. There were no double-decker sandwiches stuffed with fries. Pasta was occasional, not nightly. You had 1 slice of toast with eggs, not 3 with butter and jam. Bread served a purpose. It filled a gap, but it was never the main attraction. Casseroles stretched ingredients, sure, but they were often bulked up with vegetables or broth, not layers of pasta or dough. Even snacks were leaner. A hard-boiled egg, a handful of nuts, an apple with a slice of cheddar. Bread was not demonized, it was respected. You used it sparingly because it was filling, because it had weight. And when you finished eating, you did not lounge, you got up and moved. Sometimes because you had to, because the yard needed mowing or the driveway needed sweeping. And those chores? They were not just weekend obligations, they were your workout plan. In the 1960s, the neighborhood buzzed with the sound of kids doing chores. Lawns did not cut themselves, leaves did not rake themselves, cars were washed with a hose, a sponge, and elbow grease, by hand under the sun, with no detail shop in sight. Parents handed out jobs without discussion. The mower was pushed, not ridden. The hedges were trimmed with shears that made your arms sore. It was not punishment, it was participation. Everyone had a role, even the youngest kids. You earned your allowance in sweat. You learned how to work with your body, not just your brain. And you stayed lean because the day demanded it. Every little task pulled you off the couch and into the world. And that rhythm extended to how you ate too. Because when strawberries showed up at the market, you knew it was summer. And when they disappeared, you waited until next year. Food in the 1960s had a rhythm that matched the seasons. You did not expect strawberries in January. You did not demand corn on the cob in February. You waited, and when it finally arrived, it felt like a gift. Grocery stores reflected the calendar, not the freezer section. Summer meant tomatoes, cucumbers, peaches. Fall brought squash and apples. Winter meant more stews, more canned goods, more root vegetables. People ate what they could grow, what was fresh, what was available. It made meals more diverse, not less. Each season had its own flavor, and when something ran out, you adapted. You did not ship it in from 3 continents away. That kind of patience grounded people. It taught you to appreciate what was in front of you, not what you wished you had. And when your stomach hurt or you felt tired, you did not pop a pill or scroll symptoms online. You listened to the voice that had seen it all, your grandmother. And more often than not, her advice was the same. Go outside and walk it off. In a 1960s household, Grandma's medicine cabinet often started at the back door. Feeling sluggish? Go weed the garden. Got a headache? Take a walk and drink some water? Ate too much? Help hang laundry and let your body reset. There were no gummies, no supplements, no magic teas, just motion. You did not rush to medicate every ache. You moved through it. The belief was simple. The body knows how to heal if you get out of its way and stop sitting around. Run it off was not always literal, but it captured the culture. Health was tied to habit, to resilience, to action. People trusted their bodies more because they used them more. And that mindset shaped how young people approached work too. You did not just wait to grow up before earning your keep. Physical labor was part of coming of age, and for a lot of teenagers it began with an after-school job that paid in sweat. In the 1960s, plenty of teenagers had jobs, and not behind a screen. They bagged groceries, loaded trucks, carried newspapers in heavy canvas sacks. They worked in farms, in factories, in garages. These were not internships or resume builders. They were real jobs with real hours and real effort. You came home tired, sore, hungry, but satisfied. The money mattered, but so did the motion. It taught responsibility, discipline, and most of all, it kept you moving. Teenagers were not glued to phones or gaming chairs. They were hauling, lifting, scrubbing, pushing. And because they were burning so much energy, they did not have to count anything. Their lives were the workout. Their meals were earned. And even if the job only paid a few dollars, it came with something bigger. A sense of pride. A sense that you were part of the world, not just watching it. And long before we started naming every diet or counting every carb, people lived a lifestyle that made staying lean feel natural. Because the truth is, being skinny in the 1960s was not a goal. It was just the result. For many early settlers and indigenous peoples, survival meant using whatever was available in nature. Watercress, a leafy green that grows in cool, fast-moving streams, was one such resource. It's been used for centuries, especially in Europe and North America, not only for its sharp, peppery flavor, but for its nutritional punch. Watercress soup became a popular dish when fresh greens were abundant in spring and summer, offering a source of vitamin C and essential minerals. Simple to prepare, watercress soup combined foraged greens with broth or milk, often seasoned with onions or garlic for flavor. The greens were widely available, but because they spoil quickly, preservation was tricky. For many, the solution was to dry the leaves for use in the winter months when fresh greens were hard to come by. Culturally, watercress soup had its place in rural and pioneer kitchens, representing both frugality and ingenuity. It was a dish born of necessity, yet it's packed with value, providing vital nutrients during lean seasons. For settlers, it was a reminder of the Earth's hidden treasures and a sign that even humble ingredients could be transformed into something life-sustaining. Beaten biscuits are typically an American-only concept. They refer to physically pounding the dough with some kind of mallet or rolling pin and then really working that batter over, like as hard as you possibly can. This basically gives it an almost rubber band-like texture with how elastic it becomes, and that makes it really different from your typical biscuit dough. See, that one can barely hold itself together, but this one functions as a whole individual unit. It has all your typical ingredients too, and it's honestly a little cheaper overall since it uses all-purpose flour. In the South and in Appalachian homes, it was pretty common for colonial middle-class homes to make this as a snack or even as a breakfast item. It took way more effort than it was worth, though. Women had to beat the dough for hours and hours until it was ready. Let's talk about a culinary pairing so simple it feels almost too obvious: eggs and butter. When combined into a creamy spread, it's a game changer. Egg butter, an unassuming mix of chopped boiled eggs and softened butter, was a staple born from practicality and versatility. Spread it on bread, pair it with crackers, or use it as a filling, and you've got a rich, satisfying treat. Egg butter has its roots in Northern and Eastern Europe, particularly Finland, where it's known as munavoi. Traditionally, it's served with rye bread or karjalan piraka, a type of pastry. Immigrants brought the recipe to America, where it found a home as a budget-friendly spread, especially during lean times. After all, when protein was scarce, this combination packed a double punch. Boiled eggs and butter were often kitchen staples, making this dish both accessible and economical. And if you think about it, it's essentially the predecessor to egg salad, only without the mayonnaise. With its velvety texture and timeless appeal, egg butter might just be the original butterboard's trend. Only, instead of Instagram likes, it earned a spot on the dinner table through sheer practicality. Long before store-bought desserts were the norm, early settlers had to get creative with what nature provided. Grape dumplings were one such innovation, born out of necessity and resourcefulness. Made by boiling dough dumplings in grape juice, they were a sweet, sticky treat that made the most of fresh seasonal fruit, especially in areas where wild grapes were abundant. Ingredients were simple but vital: flour, water, and whatever wild or cultivated grapes were on hand. The grapes provided not only sweetness, but also a dose of vitamins and antioxidants. In a time when processed sugar wasn't always available, fruit like grapes were a natural choice for sweetening dishes. Preservation was key. Grapes could be preserved as jams or dried, ensuring that the taste of summer lasted through the colder months. Though grape dumplings weren't a staple in every household, they were a beloved treat for those who could access fresh grapes. Their cultural significance lies in their embodiment of self-sufficiency, utilizing locally available ingredients for a nutritious, comforting dessert. In an era when making the most out of every resource was crucial, grape dumplings were the perfect example of how creativity could stretch both the seasons and the pantry. Johnny Marzetti is a dish, not a person, and it's one that's entirely tied to the history of food in Ohio. While people debate the exact circumstances that led to this dish, there's no doubt that it was named after the real-life Johnny Marzetti, who was a restaurant owner up in Columbus, Ohio. His entire family owned what was known as the Marzetti Italian restaurant during the early years of the 20th century, and the most commonly accepted origin story is that this dish actually began here. It was something so popular that people started to associate the Marzetti name with it, and it was their best-selling pasta. What people don't know for sure is whether the dish was something that just caught a catchy name or whether it was Johnny Marzetti's magnum opus. All we do know is that around the 1950s and 60s, you started hearing this name a lot more commonly. In the Midwest regions, it was known for being on school lunch menus and for its ability to feed an entire busy family with almost no effort. Certain dishes carry an air of mystery, and Limping Susan is certainly one of them. This Southern classic, a humble yet hearty combination of rice and okra, has been a comfort food for generations. The dish gets its distinct flavor from bacon fat, and the addition of onions brings out its savory richness. Despite its simple ingredients, it's a dish with a lot of heart and a name that raises eyebrows. The origins of Limping Susan are somewhat unclear, but many believe the name refers to the uneven way the okra cooks and softens, giving the dish its limping character. In rural Southern kitchens, where food was often made from whatever was available, this dish would have been a common way to stretch ingredients into a filling meal. Okra, a vegetable that thrives in the warm climate, was often a key ingredient in many Southern dishes, and rice was the perfect companion to soak up the flavors. Interestingly, while it may not be found on many restaurant menus today, Limping Susan still holds a place in the hearts of those who grew up with it. For early settlers and rural communities, nothing went to waste, especially when it came to hogs. Hogs head cheese was born out of necessity and practicality, utilizing parts of the pig that might otherwise be discarded. While it's technically a terrine, it's not cheese at all, but a savory, jellied loaf made from boiled pig's head, ears, and sometimes trotters. The ingredients were humble: pork, vinegar, spices, and whatever else could be found on hand. These cuts of meat, rich in collagen, gave the dish its unique texture and flavor. Back then, preservation was everything. Whether it was smoked, salted, or chilled, hog's head cheese had staying power. It could last for weeks without refrigeration, an essential quality in the pre-canning days. Culturally, it was a dish that spoke to resourcefulness. It was food for those who had to make every scrap count, and it carried significance across various regions, especially in the South. Whether served cold on crackers or eaten as a filling for sandwiches, it provided nourishment that could stretch a meal. But beyond its practicality, it was also a symbol of ingenuity. It wasn't fancy or glamorous, but it was a lifeline. Pepperoni rolls are actually a pretty iconic and beloved snack if you go on over to West Virginia. A lot of people think that this has to do with how the snack has its roots deep in the Italian immigrant communities that have settled down there and made a home throughout the 20th century, but I also think it's this general trend of Americans preferring Italian and French food. A lot of miners would eat these rolls, though, especially in the towns that were really known for mining. Pepperoni rolls remained popular through the 1980s, especially as a budget-friendly meal option during economic downturns. Their portability made them a go-to for busy families and workers looking for quick, affordable lunches. Unlike pricier deli meats or elaborate sandwiches, pepperoni rolls offered a satisfying blend of protein, carbs, and flavor at a low cost. Plus, their shelf stability meant they could be packed ahead of time for school lunches, road trips, or shift work. The rolls were made out of your typical pastry dough and stuffed to the brim with cheese and pepperoni, and they became a staple of all kinds of local bakeries. You could even find to-go versions for sale in convenience stores, and if you wanted rolls that looked fancier, then you'd go for the ones served at restaurants. Immigrant ingenuity often gave rise to some of America's most beloved comfort foods, and this one is no exception. Born from German-American kitchens, Gheta is a hearty breakfast staple that combines pork, beef, steel-cut oats, and spices into a savory sausage loaf. Its roots trace back to German immigrants in Cincinnati, Ohio, who adapted their traditional Grützwurst to the ingredients available in their new homeland. Stretching meat with oats made it more affordable while adding a unique, satisfying texture. Families would fry up slices of this loaf to serve alongside eggs, creating a breakfast that was not only filling but economical. Over time, it became a regional specialty, so beloved that it inspired annual festivals like the Glier's Gheta Fest, celebrating this humble yet delicious creation. Cincinnatians consume over 1 million pounds of Gheta annually. That's enough to make you wonder if oats might secretly be the city's fuel. What sets Gheta apart is its slow-cooked process, which allows the spices to meld with the oats and meat, creating a flavor that's savory, earthy, and utterly distinct. Once prized by early American settlers, ground cherries, small, papery shelled fruits related to tomatoes, made their way into kitchens as a sweet and tangy preserve. These tiny berries, also known as husk tomatoes, were a staple in colonial gardens due to their hardiness and the ease with which they grew. Early pioneers relied on these wild fruits to add flavor to their otherwise limited diets. Ground cherry jam, with its slightly tart and sweet flavor, quickly became a favorite treat. The fruit's availability, particularly during late summer, made it an affordable preserve for those looking to extend the harvest. Ground cherries can be turned into a variety of sweet spreads and jams, often mixed with sugar, pectin, and a touch of lemon juice to balance the natural tartness. Families would often stockpile jars of the jam as a vital addition to their winter meals. This jam offered not just a flavorful spread, but a much-needed source of vitamin C in an era when fresh fruits were harder to come by. While making jam may seem easy, the tiny size of the fruit posed a challenge. Harvesting and deshelling each ground cherry was a time-consuming task, but the end result, A jar of sweet and zesty jam was worth every minute. BBQ Spaghetti is a Memphis, Tennessee classic, and it takes the best of both worlds. You have barbecue, which is something that Memphis swore long ago that it couldn't live without, and you have spaghetti. Memphis-style barbecue works extremely well with spaghetti because it has a big focus on the smoky and tangy side of things. This barbecue uses a sauce that's made out of marinara and a tomato-based barbecue sauce too, which is a big part of what gives it that smoky flavor. Then, you have your pulled pork and chicken, along with some classics like bell peppers and garlic, which give the dish its finishing touches as far as flavor is concerned. Despite its status as a regional classic, this is really just a new dish that only recently made its name in the Memphis food scene. It wasn't always there, but what was a big and ancient part of Memphis tradition is barbecuing. You could just consider this another successful experiment in that long-lasting tradition. It's originally believed that African American communities came up with barbecue spaghetti, and it was probably a way to get rid of leftover meat. Since there probably wasn't enough to constitute a full plate, people would often mix it with any kind of grain or starch to get a full meal. During the toughest times in American history, the ability to turn scraps into sustenance was nothing short of a survival skill. Enter the humble yet hearty Slumgullion, a stew that thrived on resourcefulness. Born from the need to stretch ingredients, it was often made with whatever was on hand: potatoes, leftover meat, vegetables, and sometimes a dash of seasoning if you were lucky. It was less about following a recipe and more about making do with what you had. The name Slumgullion likely originated from 19th century mining camps, where the dish was cobbled together from bits and pieces miners could scavenge. The word itself might have started as slang for something watery or of questionable quality, though anyone who's had a well-made version would argue it's far better than the name suggests. Think of it as the original clean out the fridge meal, but with a lot more soul. It was filling, nutritious, and most importantly, affordable. And if someone complained about what was in it, well, they were promptly reminded that beggars couldn't be choosers. Slumgullion was a testament to the ingenuity and determination of those who faced hardship with a pot, a fire, and a whole lot of grit. A dish born of necessity but remembered for its practicality and heartiness. In the rural South, nothing says comfort food quite like cornbread, except when it's loaded with cracklins. These crispy bits of fried pork skin not only add flavor but also represent a deep connection to resourcefulness during tough times. Cracklin cornbread was born out of necessity, created by farmers and settlers who used every part of the hog to ensure nothing went to waste. The cracklins, the byproduct of rendering pork fat, were mixed into cornbread for added texture, fat, and flavor. Simple ingredients like cornmeal, buttermilk, and the coveted cracklins were staples in southern pantries. But what really made this dish special was how it could stretch a meal, providing nourishment and filling bellies during long days of labor. With no refrigeration, pork fat was often used for preservation, and cornbread could be baked in large batches to last for days, making it both practical and economical. Culturally, cracklin cornbread holds a place in Southern culinary tradition, often served alongside beans, greens, or a hearty stew. It symbolizes a time when every part of the animal was used and no meal was complete without a little indulgence in crispy pork fat. So, soufflé potatoes are their own little niche corner of Louisiana comfort. A lot of people claim that the origins of this dish come from the days when French cooking had taken over the minds of almost every home chef in America. This is mostly because the way these potatoes are made is a French tradition, but it is one that's been adopted by Louisiana ever since the early days of the 20th century. Here, what you basically do is fry the potatoes twice. Once, you fry them at a low temperature in hot oil, which helps soften the potatoes up. This gives them that lightness that they're so well known for. Then, the second time you fry them, you really turn up the heat and make sure they get a perfectly golden, crunchy exterior. This gives them that airiness they're so used to. It's pretty much one of the most well-received side dishes, and in some restaurants and fine dining circles, even an amazing main course. It's actually really easy to mess this up though. because frying it at just the wrong temperature and being just a little bit off on the timing can be pretty disastrous. You might end up with a burnt souffle or something that just doesn't feel good to bite into at all. Not every breakfast dish makes you stop and ask, are we brave enough for this? Deviled kidneys, a bold and flavorful classic, is one such dish. Originating in 19th century England and embraced by American households with British roots, this recipe turns humble lamb kidneys into a fiery, mustard-laced delicacy served atop crisp toast. The term deviled refers to the liberal use of spicy seasonings like mustard, cayenne pepper, and Worcestershire sauce, which were added to mask the strong, earthy flavor of the kidneys. It was a wake-up call for your taste buds. And for those wondering, yes, kidneys were a practical choice. They were affordable, protein-rich, and readily available during times when wasting any part of the animal was unthinkable. In Victorian times, deviled kidneys became a breakfast staple for the adventurous eater, often paired with tea and a stiff upper lip. Some even considered it the perfect cure for a rough morning after a late-night indulgence. After all, when your breakfast bites back, it's hard to dwell on anything else. Deviled kidneys may not top every modern brunch menu, but they remain a testament to the creativity of cooks who knew how to make the most of what they had: spices, toast, and just a touch of daring. Yep. In the kitchens of the American South, where resourcefulness reigned supreme, nothing went to waste, especially not pot liquor, the nutrient-rich broth left behind after cooking greens like collards or turnip greens. This flavorful liquid, often overlooked today, became the star of a humble but ingenious creation: pot liquor biscuits. For families with limited resources, every drop of nutrition counted. Pot liquor, infused with vitamins, minerals, and the smoky essence of cured pork, was far too valuable to discard. So instead of plain water or milk, it became the liquid base for biscuit dough, enriching a simple staple with added flavor and sustenance. The result was biscuits with a story baked into every crumb, a testament to ingenuity and survival. While the ingredients were basic: flour, pot liquor, fat, and perhaps a pinch of salt, the biscuits carried the weight of history. Greens were a cornerstone of Southern diets, cultivated in small gardens or foraged from the wild, and pot liquor was their flavorful legacy. Pairing it with biscuits turned this broth into a meal, stretching resources without sacrificing taste. It's said that Southern cooks considered pot liquor liquid gold, and they weren't wrong. In an era when food waste wasn't an option, these biscuits embodied the art of making something extraordinary out of the ordinary. Back to the Appalachian region, and this time the Piedmont region as well, a sonker is one of the highlights of Northern Carolina cuisine. It's often served warm with like a generous scoop of ice cream, but it's actually a fruit dessert. These are really popular up in the South, you know? They get very serious about their fruit desserts. It's hard to find out where the dish first originated from, but lots of people believe that farming families that were trying to make the best out of their fruits are the first ones who found it. Actually, a lot of people seem to unanimously agree that it first popped up in Surry County. This is also where it's most well known, so maybe this one has a bit of truth to it. The city of Mount Airy in Surry County is also known for its massive use of sonkers and how it really doesn't ever let up on them. People there make these throughout the year, around the clock, and it's a point of competition for local bakeries too. Surry County even has Sonker Day, which is an annual event that celebrates the dessert. It's this community thing in Pilot Mountain, and people from around the place come and make their best version of a sonker, along with lots of other regional foods that have tons of history. The Sonker contest is one of the best things to check out in the area, so if you're ever around, give it a visit. Sometimes the simplest dishes carry the deepest roots. Take Hasty Pudding, a boiled cornmeal porridge that's as much a part of American history as the Declaration of Independence. It's a dish that dates back to colonial times when frugality and ingenuity ruled the kitchen. Made by simmering cornmeal with water or milk until thickened, it could be served sweet with molasses or savory with salt and butter. What's in a name, you ask? The hasty part is a bit of a misnomer. While it's quicker to make than a full roast dinner, it still requires patience to stir the mixture into its smooth, creamy consistency. But back then, Time wasn't measured by TikTok trends. It was measured by hearty meals that filled bellies without emptying wallets. Cornmeal became the star ingredient for this dish after wheat shortages made traditional English pudding impractical. It was cheap, plentiful, and distinctly American, making hasty pudding a symbol of resourcefulness during the nation's early years. The dish was so iconic that it even earned a shout-out in the 18th century song Yankee Doodle, which references hasty pudding as a beloved staple. The Jerusalem artichoke, often confused with its distant relative, the globe artichoke, was a hidden gem in early American diets. Indigenous to North America, this knobby root vegetable was prized for its ability to thrive in poor soil and harsh climates, ideal for survival when farming conditions weren't always reliable. Despite its name, it has no connection to Jerusalem. The name likely evolved from the Italian word girasole, meaning sunflower, due to its sunflower-like blossoms. The artichoke's earthy, nutty flavor and its versatility made it a pantry staple. It could be roasted, boiled, mashed, or even made into soup. While fresh Jerusalem artichokes were enjoyed throughout the growing season, they were also stored for winter by either canning or drying the tubers. The tuber's natural sweetness was a prized feature, and with limited preservation methods, this food was an essential part of winter diets. Nutritionally, Jerusalem artichokes were packed with inulin, a carbohydrate that's good for gut health. Unlike many root vegetables, they have a low glycemic index, making them a valuable option for those watching their blood sugar. Of course, they also come with their share of challenges, mainly their tendency to cause gas if consumed in large quantities. Eggs goldenrod. An interesting name for a dish, don't you think? What's even more of an eye-catcher is the fact that this apparently looks like a goldenrod, the actual flour. Eggs goldenrod were a breakfast dish that pretty much started to become popular throughout the 1950s and 1960s, but also had a resurgence throughout the 80s. In that decade, their reputation existed only as this breakfast dish, which was right out of the cookbooks of the early 50s, and that gave it a lot of pull with a certain crowd. Towards the end of the 20th century, there was this movement of bringing back vintage retro dishes that people had largely forgotten. What really is a goldenrod, though? Well, the dish itself is this really thick mix of egg yolks that are mashed and served over a bechamel sauce. You typically pair this up with toast and call it a day, but some people really go all out with herbs, seasonings, and all kinds of hash browns too. As far as vintage breakfast go, this is one of the best recipes to pick out from the 20th century. It's also really light and healthy, so it makes for a pretty calorie-conscious breakfast. You get to indulge in some flavors you wouldn't find today on top of keeping that deficit going. Sometimes the most unassuming vegetables are turned into something spectacular, and parsnips are no exception. Grated, mixed into a batter, and fried to golden perfection, parsnip fritters are a delightful twist on traditional fritters often found in kitchens where creativity and thriftiness meet. With their mild, slightly sweet flavor, parsnips provide the perfect base for a savory snack or side dish. While parsnips have been enjoyed since ancient Roman times, they saw a resurgence in popularity during times of scarcity, particularly during the Great Depression, when root vegetables like parsnips were more affordable than other produce. The dish was a way to turn simple, inexpensive ingredients into something flavorful and satisfying. The beauty of parsnip fritters lies in their versatility. While they're commonly served with a sprinkle of salt or a dip in a savory sauce, some cooks even add spices like cinnamon or nutmeg for an unexpected sweetness. Whether enjoyed as a side dish, appetizer, or light snack, parsnip fritters make use of a vegetable that might otherwise be overlooked. Today, they may not be a household name, but these crispy, golden bites continue to remind us that sometimes all it takes is a little batter and some heat to turn a humble vegetable into something extraordinary. Native Americans were the original survival experts, foraging and preparing meals that could sustain them in even the harshest conditions. One plant they turned to was the Indian turnip, also known as Jack in the pulpit. This root, easily recognizable by its unique flower structure, was a versatile food source, though it wasn't always the easiest to prepare. The plant contains toxins that must be carefully removed before it can be eaten. This involved either drying or boiling it multiple times to render it safe. It wasn't exactly a pop it in the pot and go kind of vegetable. But with the right preparation, it became an excellent starchy base for soups, stews, or even roasted on a fire. While it wasn't something you could stock up on like potatoes, its seasonal availability made it a crucial part of the indigenous diet. The plant's nutritional value came from its carbohydrates, which provided energy for those long days spent hunting and gathering. It was also an important protein supplement when other food sources were scarce. Culturally, the Indian turnip was both a staple and a symbol of survival. It taught early settlers and indigenous peoples the value of resourcefulness, how to make use of nature's hidden treasures. We stayed lean without trying, because life itself kept us moving. What do you miss most from that world? Share your memory, hit like, and subscribe to keep the past alive.